In a small southern town on a cold afternoon, people wanted to stay inside and hide from the weather. The police department was busy, but nothing out of the ordinary happened until a call came in over the radio about a theft at a nearby convenience store. The suspect was described as a black woman wearing a business suit and driving a black sedan. Officer Kyle Matthews, a veteran of the department, grabbed his radio and answered the call 10-4. Matthews said with a sly smile, "Dispatch, I'm close by, I'll take care of it." Matthews had a reputation for being rude, especially to people of color, and had been the subject of many complaints, but nothing ever stuck. He was good at hiding behind his badge, and his bosses often looked the other way, ignoring any accusations. As misunderstood, he sped off in his cruiser toward the convenience store. As he got closer, he saw the black sedan that fit the description. A black woman was sitting calmly behind the wheel of a parked car outside, as if she had no idea what was going on around her. Matthew's heart was racing with excitement. This was exactly the kind of situation he lived for, a chance to show someone they were wrong. He walked up to the car, smirk appearing on his face, and knocked on the window. The woman turned her head toward him, lowering the glass to show her license and registration. Matthews barked without even saying hello. His tone was all ready. The woman calmly and collectively reached into her glove compartment and handed him her papers without saying a word. She didn't seem to be bothered by his hostile behavior. Matthews took a quick look at her license and saw that her name was Special Agent Ava Mitchell. Of course, he didn't bother to check her credentials, because to him she was just another suspect, and that was all that mattered. "Get out of the car," Matthews said, taking a step back and placing his hand more firmly on the steering wheel. Keeping his hand firmly on his gun, Ava sighed quietly and obeyed. She got out of the car wearing a sharp black suit and stood in front of Matthews. As she did, she could feel the weight of his gaze, which was a mix of disdain and satisfaction. Matthews told her to put her hands behind her back because she was being arrested for robbery. Ava raised an eyebrow and said, "Excuse me, robbery? I think you have the wrong person." Matthews laughed and said, "Yeah, right, you fit the description, black woman driving a black car." Ava's eyes narrowed a little as she said, "I'm an FBI agent, and my badge is in my car. Let's talk this over before you do something you'll regret." Matthews laughed sharply. "Oh, an FBI agent now, are we? I've heard that one before. You think flashing some fake badge will save you? You're coming with me." Before Ava could answer, Matthews grabbed her arm roughly and twisted it behind her back, slapping the handcuffs on with too much force. She winced a little but stayed. "You don't want to do this," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You're making a huge mistake." But Matthews wasn't listening. He was already leading her to his cruiser. He was full of pride and the thrill of showing off his power, and as he pushed her into the back seat of his car, he could feel a twisted sense of pride rising inside him. For him, this was just another victory, another criminal taken off the streets. Ava, on the other hand, sat quietly in the back of the car, her mind racing but her face betraying her. She had worked with people like Matthews before, people who let their power get the best of them and treated people badly because of the color of their skin. But she also knew that the truth would come out. It always did. As Matthews drove away from the scene of the crime, he couldn't help but look at Ava through the rearview mirror and smile. "You're going to wish you hadn't lied to me," he said. "We'll see what the judge says about your little FBI story." Ava stayed silent. Looking out the window, she had been through much worse situations before, but this one made her feel especially ashamed. The unfairness, the casual racism, and the abuse of power made her feel weak, but she wouldn't show Matthews any sign of weakness. She knew that her strength came from being able to stay calm in tough situations, and she wasn't going to let this one break her. When they got to the station, Matthews dragged Ava out of the car and into the building, ignoring the curious looks from his co-workers, some of whom knew who Ava was. They didn't say anything because they didn't want to step on Matthews' toes. Matthews led Ava into an interrogation room and roughly pushed her into a chair. "Sit tight, I'll be right back," he said, locking the door behind him. Ava sat there with her wrists still cuffed and her expression blank. She could hear Matthews laughing with someone outside the door about how he had caught a big one, but she knew it was only a matter of time before things went bad. What Matthews didn't know was that karma had a way of catching up with him. It was already coming for people like him. As Ava sat in the cold, clean room, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above added to the tension in the air. Her hands were still tied and her wrists were starting to hurt from the tight metal cuffs, but she stayed calm. As an FBI agent, Ava was used to dealing with hostile people, but being on this side of the table, handcuffed, humiliated, and treated like a criminal was a whole new experience. She looked around the room. The walls of the interrogation room were a dull gray color that took away any life from the space. The only furniture was a table with 2 chairs, one across from her, where she thought Matthews would soon sit down to question her further. Ava was sure that he would take his time and enjoy every moment of what he thought was victory, but she knew the truth, and that was enough to keep her grounded. Outside the room, Officer Matthews was having the time of his life, leaning against the front desk and chatting with one. Officer Jenkins, a younger man who looked up to Matthews like a mentor, was wide-eyed as Matthews told him about the robbery suspect he had just arrested. "You should have seen her, man," Matthews said, his voice oozy with arrogance as if she thought she was above it all, and flashing a fake FBI badge like that was going to get her off the hook. Jenkins nodded and hung on every word. "You think she's part of a bigger operation?" Matthews shrugged, with an smug grin on his face. "It doesn't matter. I'll give her an interrogation because she's just another pump trying to be smart, but I got her good." Jenkins laughed, clearly impressed. "You always know how to handle these situations, man." Matthews puffed up his chest a little more, enjoying the attention. "That's right, you just got to put them in their place and show 'em who's boss. People like her always think they can get away with stuff, but not on my watch." Ava stayed still in the room and carefully listened to the sounds outside the door. She knew Matthews was probably bragging and making up the story to help himself, but Ava wasn't worried about his inflated ego. She had dealt with men whose egos were like his before, who thought their power was so great that they could get away with anything just because they wore a badge. But Ava was patient. She knew the truth would come out and hit Matthews harder than he could ever imagine. The door suddenly opened, and Matthews walked in, his confidence almost dripping off him. He sat down across from Ava and leaned back. He sat back in his chair as if he had already won an unspoken game. "All right, let's get this over with," he said, slamming a notepad on the table and pulling out a pen. "You're going to tell me exactly what happened at that store, how many people are involved, who's in charge, and how long you've been running this scam." Ava raised an eyebrow, but her face was still blank. "Are you serious? Are you really going to do this?" Matthew smirked. "Oh, I'm dead serious. You can either make this easy on yourself and talk, or we'll drag this out," she said. Ava sighed and leaned back in her chair a little. "I've already told you who I am. If you take a moment to check my credentials, you'll see that I'm an FBI agent." "This whole thing is a misunderstanding," she said. Matthews rolled his eyes and spoke more smugly. "You think you're the first person to try and pull the FBI card on me? You're not fooling anyone." Ava's patience was wearing thin, but she stayed calm. "Look, I know you think you have this all figured out," he said. "Check my ID, call me, Do whatever you need to do to make sure I'm who I say I am, Mackie said, leaning back again and crossing his arms over his chest. Trust me, I'll be checking a lot of things, but I'd rather hear what you have to say about the robbery. See, we have witnesses, security footage, and a lot of evidence pointing in your direction, so you might want to start talking before things get worse for you. Ava couldn't help but laugh. Witnesses were caught on security footage whispering, "Are you even listening to yourself? I wasn't involved in any robbery. I was passing through town on official business." Mackie scoffed, "I'm the President of the United States. Come on, lady, you can do the ACT. You're caught fair and square." Ava sighed again, her patience really being tested. "This is ridiculous. I don't know what you think you have, but it's not me." Mackie stood up quickly, slammed his hands on the table, and said, "I'm done playing games with you. I will wait here until you decide to talk, and if that takes all night, so be it." Ava looked him in the eye and said, "Do what you need to do. I have nothing to hide." Mackie stormed out of the room and slammed the door behind him. Ava stayed calm, her mind racing but her face showing no emotion. She knew this wasn't over yet, but Matthews didn't know that every minute he wasted was bringing him closer to the truth and a reckoning he couldn't see coming. Matthews paced back and forth in the interrogation room, his face red with anger. He wasn't used to suspects being this calm and collected, especially not in this situation. Something about Ava's behavior was bothering him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. He had been so sure of himself up to this point, but now he couldn't deny it. Officer Jenkins walked up to Matthews and asked, "Good man," with a worried tone in his voice, "you've been in there a while with her. You think we should check her credentials again? She did say she was Facebook affiliated." Matthews looked at him funny and said, "Are you serious? You really think someone like her is FBI? Come on, Jenkins. Don't be so naive." Jenkins didn't want to question his boss, but he couldn't shake the feeling in his gut that something wasn't right. "What if we're making a mistake?" Mackie gave him a sharp look. "We're not making a mistake." Jenkins reluctantly nodded and took a step back. Mackey's words didn't help him feel better about his doubts, but he couldn't argue with them. He still thought about checking Ava's credentials. Back in the interrogation room, Ava sat quietly with her hands still cuffed, her mind racing. She had been through tough situations before, but this was different. She knew Matthews was trying to break her down, but what he was saying made her question everything. Didn't realize it, but his actions were only making her more determined. Ava had been trained to deal with stress, stay calm, and stay focused no matter what. As she sat there, her mind wandered to her team at the bureau. They were probably wondering where she was. She had been on her way to a meeting with a local contact, nothing important, but important enough for her to be in this small town. Little did she know that Matthews had pulled her over because he thought she was involved in the robbery. It was a mess, but Ava wasn't worried because she had been taught to be patient and wait for the right time. She knew Matthews was making mistakes because he was too proud, and that would be his downfall. Ava just had to bite her lip. The door opened again, and Matthews walked in with a file in his hand. He sat down across from Ava and threw the file onto the table with a smug grin. "See this?" he asked, tapping the file with his finger. "This is everything we have on you, witness. I have statements, security footage, and a lot of evidence that points to you being involved in this robbery, so as I said earlier, it's time to start talking." Ava looked at the file, but she didn't move. She knew there was no real evidence in it, at least nothing that implicated her. It was all a show to scare her into confessing to something she didn't do. But Ava wasn't going to fall for it. She told him calmly, "That has nothing to do with me. I've already told you I'm an FBI agent." Check my credentials if you don't believe me, Matthews said with a smirk. You think you're smart, don't you? You think you can just sit there cool as a cucumber and outlast me? Well, guess what, sweetheart? I'm not going anywhere. We'll sit here all night if we have to, and when you finally crack, I'll be right here ready to hear the truth, Ava replied. I've already told you the truth, you're just not listening for a moment. Matthews's confidence dropped. He had been waiting for her to say something. Brake should have started to show signs of weakness by now, but Ava stayed calm, collected, and irritatingly cool. It was getting to him more than he wanted to admit, so he got up and paced around the small room again. You know what I think? He asked, his voice raised. I think you're trying to play me. You're sitting there all quiet, acting like you have nothing to hide, but I know better people like you always think you're smarter than everyone else. But here's the thing, I've been doing this for a long time, and I always get to the truth. It was clear that Ava wasn't going to give in to Matthews's attempts to get her to react emotionally, but she wasn't going to let him. I'm not playing any games, she said evenly. I'm just waiting for you to do your job, properly verify my identity, and this whole thing will be cleared up. Matthew stopped pacing and glared at her. You think you're in a position to give me orders? Ava shook her head. I'm not giving you orders. I'm giving you a chance to fix your mistake before it's too late. Matthews's jaw tightened. You think this is okay? Is a mistake, I know it is, A replied, and deep down you do too. There was a moment of silence between them as Matthew stared at her. He wanted to believe that he had caught her lying and that she was just another criminal trying to get away with something, but something about her eyes and the way she carried herself made him start to doubt his own assumptions. Without saying a word, Matthew stormed out of the room and slammed the door behind him. Ava let out a sigh of relief. Matthew's confidence was starting to waver as Ava sat in the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above her creating a sterile atmosphere that felt heavy with tension. She could hear Matthews pacing outside, muttering to himself. Each step he took was a reminder of his frustration, which only made her more determined. The minutes that passed felt like hours as she waited for Matthews to return, but she refused to let the uncertainty shake her. Her confidence, she went over her training in her head, reminding herself that patience was key. Every investigator had their own style, and Matthews was no different. He liked to scare and argue, but she would not fall for his tricks. Eventually, the door opened, and Matthew walked in looking more determined than ever. This time, he brought in Jenkins, who looked hesitant as he walked in. A noticed the change in Jenkins's behavior. He seemed torn between loyalty to his partner and the urge to do what was right. Matthew sneered at Ava and said, I hope you're ready for round 2, because this time we're getting serious. Jenkins hesitated before settling down and looked between Matthews and Ava. What's going on? He asked, trying to get a sense of the mood. Matthews leaned forward, his voice chirping with sarcasm. Just trying to get some answers from our little FBI agent here, you know, the one who thinks she can outsmart us. Ava met Jenkins's gaze and smiled. I'm not trying to outsmart anyone. I'm just... Matthew slammed his hand on the table, startling Jenkins. Listen, I don't need her telling me how to do my job. She's here because she thinks she can play the victim. But the truth is she's just as guilty as the rest of them, Jenkins said. Matthews, Jenkins replied, we should really check her credentials if she is who she says she is. We might be crossing a line. Ava saw the chats and spoke up, you should check my credentials. I'm not the one who did anything wrong. Matthews gave Jenkins a mean look and said, you see this? This is what I'm talking about. She's trying to trick you with her calmness. Don't fall for it. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat and said, I'm just saying we need to be sure. Ava looked at Jenkins and saw his inner conflict and said, I get that you're just following orders, but think about it. Why would an FBI agent rob a place? It doesn't make any sense. Matthews laughed and waved his hand away. You think you can just talk your way out of this? The tension in the room was palpable, and Ava felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She couldn't let Matthew's cockiness decide her fate. Instead, she looked at Jenkins, who seemed to be on the fence. Jenkins, you have a choice. You can either listen to Matthews or verify what I've said. I'm telling you the truth, Matthews said, crossing his arms and leaning back in his chair with a smug look on his face. Let's see how long you can keep up this act, Matthews said as the seconds ticked by. Jay. Matthews looked at him with narrowed eyes, clearly annoyed by the distraction. Ava could feel the mood change in the room as Jenkins started to search. He opened the FBI database and began scrolling through the information. After what seemed like an eternity, Matthews's eyes widened in surprise as he realized what he had been saying. Wait a minute, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. You really are an agent. Matthews's face changed from pride to anger as he said, no way that can be right. She's just playing you. Ava leaned forward and locked eyes with. While Jenkins slowly nodded, Matthews was not about to let this go. You can't believe that this is all part of her plan, but Ava could see that doubt was beginning to grow in Jenkins' mind. He looked at Matthews and then back at her, saying, I need to call my sergeant, this is getting out of hand. Matthews erupted in anger. You're not calling anyone, you're going to stick with me, and we're going to get to the bottom of this, Jenkins said, raising his voice. Ava saw the tension rise between the two officers and had a brief moment of hope that Jenkins might have been smart enough to see through Matthews's threats. Matthews stepped closer to Jenkins and said, You really want to challenge me on this? You think you know better? Jenkins replied, Yes, I do. Surprising himself with his boldness, we're supposed to uphold the law, not break it. If she's innocent, then what are we doing here? Ava could feel the tension rising in the air. She seized the moment when Jenkins says, You know I'm innocent, and we both know this is wrong. Matthew's face turned angry, and his fists were clenched at his sides. You think you can just turn this around on me? You have no idea what you're messing with, he said. But Jenkins didn't give up. He picked up the phone again and said, I'm calling this in. This needs to be handled correctly. Ava held her breath as the call connected. The tension in the room was palpable, and she could feel it. Matthews was losing control of the situation as Jenkins talked on the phone. Ava couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. If Jenkins could stand up to Matthews, they might finally be able to clear her name. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind as he realized he had to do what was right, no matter what. As Jenkins talked to his sergeant, Ava felt a mix of anxiety and hope. As an FBI agent, she had been through a lot of cases, but nothing had prepared her for this one, would she? Matthews paced the small room, his anger clear. You think calling for backup is going to save you? He yelled at Jenkins. This is just a trick to turn the tables on me. Don't let her get to you. Jenkins held the phone to his ear and listened intently. Yes, Sergeant. I'm in the interrogation room with a suspect claiming to be an FBI agent. Yes, her credentials check out. I'm going to need your help on this. Ava watched. Jenkins's face changed from confused to determined, as if a light had turned on inside him. He was starting to see the bigger picture, and she felt a rush of gratitude for his honesty. Matthews, you need to calm down, Jenkins said, trying to keep control of the situation. This isn't about you. We need to do a proper investigation. Matthews stopped in his tracks, clearly shaken. This is not how it's supposed to go. You're supposed to follow my lead, Jenkins said, his voice cracking with desperation. Ava saw Jenkins's face change. If you can help me prove my innocence, we can focus on finding the real criminal behind this robbery. I've been following leads and gathering evidence, she said, hoping to appeal to his sense of justice. Jenkins nodded, still on the phone. Sergeant, I think we need to look at the footage from the robbery. There might be something there that can help us. He paused. Yes, I understand, and thank you. When he hung up, his face was determined, and he said he'd send someone to get the evidence from the scene of the crime. Matthews glared at Ava. You're not going anywhere until I say so. You think you can just walk in here and change the script? Ava shook her head, keeping her tone calm. This isn't just about me anymore, Matthews. There's a robbery case that needs to be solved. You're letting your prejudice blind you from the truth. Jenkins took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm going to stick with the facts, Matthews. Right now, those facts say that. Matthews slammed his fist on the table again, making a sound that echoed around the room. Respect, he yelled. She doesn't deserve respect. She's a criminal. Ava could see Jenkins' resolve hardening. He wasn't going to back down. She's not a criminal. You're the one acting like a criminal by treating her this way. The tension was high, and Ava could feel the walls closing in. She needed to get away from this toxic environment to gather her thoughts and prepare her case, but she couldn't. Matthews wasn't done yet. He leaned in closer and said, Jenkins, you're going to regret this. You have no idea what you're getting into. Jenkins stood his ground and said, I'm not afraid of you, Matthews. This is about justice, and I'm going to do what's right. Ava's heart raced as she watched the fight. She could see the determination in Jenkins' eyes, which gave her hope that they might be able to work together to expose Matthews's wrongdoing and solve the robbery. Just then, the door swung open, and a tall man walked in. It was Officer Ramirez, a seasoned officer with a reputation for being fair. What's going on in here? She asked, taking in the tense atmosphere. We're just having a little chat about this FBI agent, Matthews said, trying to regain control. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. And you think treating her this way is okay? You know better than that, Matthews. She's a criminal. Matthews shot back, his anger rising to the surface. Crossing her arms, Ramirez replied, if not, you need to back off and let Jenkins do his job. Ava felt a wave of relief wash over her. Ramirez's presence seemed to tip the scales in the room. She knew that if anyone could see through Matthew's lies, it was Ramirez. Jenkins is right, Ramirez continued. We need to focus on the facts and the evidence. You can't just bully your way through this investigation. Matthews clenched his jaw, his face showing frustration. This isn't over, he muttered. Ramirez turned to face Ava again and said, I'll find a way to make sure you pay for this, not if we find the real criminals first. Jenkins spoke up, and Ava nodded, feeling the momentum shift in their favor. I'm here to help. I've been following leads and know a few things about the robbery that could help us narrow down our suspects. Ramirez looked at Ava with new respect. Then let's hear what you have to say. We'll get to the bottom of this together. The room was electric with excitement. With Jenkins and Ramirez on her side, Ava felt a glimmer of hope that they might be able to figure out the truth about the robbery and stop Matthew's reckless behavior. The tension in the interrogation room was palpable as Officer Ramirez joined Ava and Jenkins. Matthews was pacing like an animal in a cage, and Ava felt a strange mix of fear and excitement for the first time. There was a glimmer of hope that they could work together on the case and prove her innocence. We need to find out more about the robbery before Matthews makes more accusations against you. Ava took a deep breath and thought, I've been keeping an eye on a pattern of robberies that have been happening across town. The last few have all involved a similar MO: masked suspects, quick hits, and then they disappear without a trace. She leaned forward and kept her voice steady. I think there's a connection between these robberies and a crew that's been operating for years. Jenkins looked at her with interest and asked, "What do you mean by connection?" "There's a gang in the area that specializes in heists like these. They've gotten away from the police before by using distractions and then running away. I think they're planning something big, and the theft I was accused of is only a part of it." Ava's heart rate went up as she spoke. She loved her job and felt like she was getting closer to solving the mystery. Ramirez leaned in to ask, "Do you think they set you up? That they framed you for the theft?" Ava replied, feeling a surge of determination. "Intel about their movements and was ready to make an arrest. I think they found out about my investigation and used Matthews to bring me down." Jenkins rubbed his chin as he thought about what she said. That makes sense. Matthews is so biased that he didn't even bother to look for real evidence. He jumped at the chance to make an arrest without thinking about the facts. That's why we need to get all the evidence we can before he can act again. Ramirez added that if we can get our hands on the surveillance footage and... Ava felt a rush of hope at their support. "Great," Jenkins said. "Let's work on gathering as much information as we can." As they started to plan, Matthews cut them off with a scowl on his face. "What are you three planning over there? You think you can just ignore my authority like this?" When Ramirez spoke to Matthews, she told him, "This isn't about you. We're trying to find the truth. The sooner you accept that, the better. You're all wasting your time." Matthews shot back, "She's guilty, and I'm going to prove it." "You look guilty right now." Ava spoke up, "You care more about your pride than finding the real criminals." Matthews glared at her, his face red with anger. "You think you can talk to me like that? You're nothing but a fraud," she said. Jenkins stepped in to help. "Stop yelling, we need to focus on the investigation." Matthews stepped closer to Ava, his voice low and threatening. "You'll regret crossing me. I have connections." "You think this is over?" Ava held his gaze, her heart racing, but she wouldn't give up. "It's just the beginning. We're going to find the truth, and you can't stop us," she said. Just then, the door opened and another officer walked in. It was Officer Mitchell, a colleague known for his honesty and strong sense of. He asked, looking back and forth between Matthews and the three people at the table, "Justice, what's going on here?" Mitchell Matthews sharply replied, "Actually, it does concern me." Shooting back, "I heard there was a situation brewing, and I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly." Ava felt a rush of relief when Mitchell walked in, and with another ally in the room, the balance was tipping in her favor. "Officer Mitchell," she began, "we were just talking about the robbery case, I believe. There was a serious misunderstanding." Mitchell raised an eyebrow and asked, "What's your side of the story?" Ava talked about what happened before she was arrested, including her investigation and her suspicions about the game. As she spoke, Mitchell's face changed from doubt to worry. "This doesn't sound right," he said, looking at Matthews. "You're just buying into her lies." Matthews sparked his anger, which Mitchell felt boiling over. He replied in a firm voice, "This isn't about you trying to save face, it's about getting the facts." Jenkins added, "We need to look at the evidence from the robbery and follow up on A's leads. If she's right, we could stop future crimes." Ramirez agreed, "Let's not waste any more time. We need to act quickly before the suspects go underground." The mood changed as the four officers united, leaving Matthews alone in his anger. Ava felt a spark of excitement and determination. Maybe they could turn things around. As the group started to plan their next move, Ava felt a renewed sense of hope. With Jenkins, Ramirez, and Mitchell by her side, they could find out who Matthews really was and expose the truth behind the robbery. This would hopefully clear her name the next morning. As she sat in the crowded office of the precinct, Jenkins had set up a meeting with her contacts from the neighborhood, and they were due to arrive soon. Ava looked around at the walls, which were covered with old photos. There were case files and faded pictures of former police officers, which showed how long the force had been around. The air was heavy with expectation and unspoken fear. "All right, Team Jenkins," he said, "we need to get to work. Our first task is to get in touch with Ava's contacts. They may have seen something that could help us." Ava nodded, her mind racing with people she could talk to. "I know a few shopkeepers and residents who were there," she said. Elfgood Ramirez replied with a voice full of excitement, "Let's get those names and numbers. Every detail matters right now." Just then, the door slowly opened and Officer Mitchell walked in holding a stack of papers. "I pulled some surveillance footage from the area around the time of the robbery," he said, "and we might find something useful there." Ava's heart raced. This was exactly what they needed. "Did you see anything suspicious?" she asked eagerly. "Not yet," Mitchell replied. "Concentrating, but the video is a little grainy. We might have to improve it to see anything important." As they sat down at the desk, the room filled with energy, and Ava could feel a sense of community growing among them. This wasn't just about proving her innocence, it was about doing the right thing and bringing the real criminals to justice. After a few minutes, Jenkins stood up and said, "Okay, let's split up our tasks. Ava, you should focus on calling your contacts, Ramirez, and I will look over the footage with Mitchell, and we'll get back together in a couple of hours to share what we find." Ava agreed, her mind already racing with the people she needed to call. She grabbed her phone and walked outside, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow on the streets, but the weight of the investigation hung over her like a dark cloud. She called Mr. Thompson, the owner of a local grocery store known for his keen observations. After a few rings, he answered. "Mr. Thompson, how can I help you?" "It's Ava," she said. She tried to keep her voice steady, even though she was nervous. "Ava, what's going on?" he asked. "I'm investigating a robbery that happened near your store last week. I was wondering if you noticed anything strange that night." There was a short pause on the line. "Well, I did see a suspicious-looking vehicle parked outside for a while. It was a dark SUV. I thought it was odd that it just sat there with its engine running." Ava's heart raced. "Did you see who was inside?" "No, I didn't, but it was definitely strange." Mr. Thompson replied, "I'll keep an eye out for you, Ava. Good luck with everything." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said as she hung up the phone, her mind racing with what he had said. If they could find that SUV, it might lead them to the suspects. She then called a few more people, each time getting more details about the night in question. There were rumors of a loud argument nearby. There were a lot of calls, and each detail felt like a piece of a bigger puzzle. After an hour of nonstop calls, Ava finally felt a surge of momentum. She had a few leads to work with when they got back together, but she needed more. There was a sense of urgency in the air, and she knew they had to act quickly before the trail went cold. Back at the precinct, Jenkins, Ramirez, and Mitchell looked over the surveillance footage. The screen flickered with static and grainy images, but they were focused. There was excitement in Ramirez's voice as she pointed to the screen and said, "There's a vehicle there." Mitchell pressed the button, and they all leaned in closer, their hearts racing. The frame showed a dark SUV idling at the curb near the scene of the crime, just as Mr. Thompson had described. "That's it," Jenkins exclaimed, "let's enhance the image. We need to see if we can get a clearer look at the license plate." They worked together to change the footage, and their excitement was palpable when the image came back. The group finally focused and gasped, "There it is!" Mitchell yelled, pointing at the screen. The license plate was only partially visible. "Let's run that through the database," RAR suggested, her fingers flying over the keyboard as they waited. The air was thick with anticipation. Ava came back just as the computer beeped, showing the search results. Mitchell leaned over and said, "We've got a match. The SUV belongs to a known member of the gang we've been following." Ava's heart raced as she took in the information. "Robberies, this is a huge deal," Jenkins confirmed with a determined look in his eyes. "We can follow this lead and finally catch these criminals." But before they could celebrate, Matthews walked into the room, glaring at Ava and barking, "What's going on here? You're wasting your time with this nonsense." Ava stood her ground, knowing that her friends were behind her. "We're following the evidence, Matthews," she said, "something you should have done from the start." Matthews laughed and waved his hand dismissively. "You think you can just..." Jennifer stepped forward and said, "This is about justice, and right now Ava is the one who deserves to lead this investigation, not you." Ava felt a rush of pride at Jenny's support. They were all in this together, and she would fight for her name and the truth no matter what. After the fight with Matthews, the mood in the precinct had changed. Tension was high, but Ava felt a newfound resolve. She was determined to prove herself, and not just to Jen. Matthews, but Jenkins, Ramirez, and Mitchell stood by her, their friendship protecting her from the negativity. "Let's focus on what we've got," Jenkins urged, getting everyone's attention. "We have a vehicle linked to a known gang that's a solid lead. We need to get the ball rolling." Ava nodded, her adrenaline pumping through her veins. "What's our next step?" "We need to find out where the SUV is and who was driving it," Jackson Ramirez said. "The registered address for the vehicle and any known associates. Let's see if we can find a link to the theft." As they worked, Ava felt a little less stressed. Each new piece of information gave her more confidence. They were no longer just dealing with shadows. They were putting together a real investigation. The clock kept ticking, and officers hurried by, each focused on their own case, but Ava's focus stayed sharp. After a few tense moments, Ramirez broke the silence. "I've got something. There is a house not too far away that looks interesting. It's worth checking out." "Let's go," Jenkins said decisively. "Ava, take charge of this. You know the area better than we do." Ava felt both excited and nervous. This was her chance to shine, but she couldn't get rid of the doubt that Matthew's words would they really take her seriously. As they gathered their deer, she pushed the thought aside, telling herself she was here to do a job and she was going to do it well. The team got into Jenkins's patrol car, and the engine started. Ava led them through the streets, her heart racing with excitement as each turn brought them closer to the address where the SUV was registered. The neighborhood was familiar, with small homes and friendly faces, but this house was on the edge, surrounded by tall trees and a neglected yard. When they got there, Ava's instincts kicked in. "Everyone stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into," she told them. The group spread out a bit, keeping a level of awareness that Ava liked as they approached the front. Jenkins led the way and firmly knocked on the wooden frame of the door. Moments later, a middle-aged man opened it, his eyes narrowing as he saw the police. "What's going on?" he asked, crossing his arms. "Good afternoon, sir," Jenkins said, flashing his back. "We're here to ask you a few questions about your vehicle. It was seen in connection with the robbery." The man's mood changed right away. Tension rose in the air. "I don't know what you're talking about. That SUV belongs to my son." "He's not." Ava spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "We just need to ask him a few questions. If he's innocent, he has nothing to worry about." The man hesitated, his eyes darting around as if he were considering his options. Finally, he sighed and stepped aside. Fine, come in. They walked into the dimly lit house, where the smell of stale coffee filled the air. The living room was a mess, showing that the family was very busy. Ava looked around. Where's your son? Jay Lynns asked. The man avoided eye contact and said, he's out with friends. He should be back soon. They exchanged knowing looks, and the air was thick with suspicion. Ava could tell they weren't getting the whole story. Do you mind if we take a look around? She asked in a polite but firm voice. What for you don't have a warrant? We don't need a warrant if we believe a crime has been committed, Jenkins replied. There was a moment of silence as the man spoke. Eventually gave up, raising his hands in defeat. Fine, but you won't find anything, he said. As they went deeper into the house, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. She paid close attention to the details, looking for anything that might give her clues. In the corner of the living room, a door was slightly ajar. She looked at Jenkins and nodded toward it. Let's check that out, he said, leading the way as they pushed the door open to reveal a small. The bedroom was a mess, clothes were all over the floor, and empty takeout containers were piled up on the desk. Ava got a chill when she saw a familiar logo on a box in the corner. It was the same box that had been found at the robbery scene. Jenkins over here, she called, pointing to the box. As they looked at it, a loud crash and shouting came from outside, stopping everyone in their tracks. What was that? Ramirez asked, his eyes wide. Let's move, Jenkins ordered. When they got outside, they saw chaos. A group of young men were yelling and pushing each other around the SUV. It was clear that something was about to go off. Ava's instincts kicked in, and she pushed forward, her heart racing. Hey, what's going on here? She yelled, trying to calm things down. One of the men turned his face into a snarl and said, You don't belong here, lady. Ava's determination grew. I'm with the FBI, you all need to calm down right now. Ava stood her ground, using the training she had received. She could feel Jenkins and the others moving in behind her, giving her strength. Listen, we're just here to ask some questions about the robbery, Jenkins said, trying to bring the men's attention back to the matter at hand. The men exchanged glances, their confidence shaky. Ava could see the fear behind their confidence, and she spoke up, If you're innocent, help us find the truth. Let's not make this worse. At that moment, Ava felt a sense of unity. The fight outside the house had reached a boiling point. The group of young men seemed to be weighing their options, stuck between their bravado and the officer standing in front of them. Ava could feel the tension in the air. It made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She stepped forward and spoke in a steady but firm voice. Let's not make this worse than it has to be. We're just here to help. One of the men, a tall guy with tattoos going up his arms, laughed at her. You think you can just walk in here and boss us around? We don't owe you anything. Ava held his gaze, her heart racing. She knew she had to keep her cool. You're right, you don't owe me anything, but if you don't help us, you could get into a lot of trouble. The FBI doesn't take these things lightly. Just then, the tension broke like a taut wire. The youngest person in the group, who was probably in his early 20s, stepped forward with either anger or fear on his face. What do you want from us? We didn't do anything, he asked. Ava saw an opportunity. We want to know who was driving the SUV that night. If you have any information, now is the time to share it. The group exchanged nervous looks. Look, we heard something. The tall guy finally admitted, his tone changing a bit. But it's not what you think. Then tell us, Jenkins urged them to move closer to Ava. I heard some guys talking about a big score. They said they were going to hit the jewelry store down on Main Street, but we didn't think they'd actually do it, the tattooed man said with a sigh. Did you see who they were? Ava asked. Not exactly, the tall guy said, shrugging his shoulders. They said something about a car. A dark SUV that sounded a lot like the one you're looking for. Did you see them driving it? Ramirez asked her in a sharp voice. No, but they said they had a guy handling the wheels. He's supposed to be real smooth, not. Like us, Ava was both frustrated and excited. They were finally getting somewhere, but time was running out. Do you know where we can find this guy? She asked. Maybe, the young man said, his confidence fading. You didn't hear it from us all right. If you're wrong, we could get in trouble for snitching. Jenkins nodded, realizing the weight of their words. Just help us. As the group huddled closer, Ava could feel their fear turning into a cautious result. They needed to protect themselves. They were willing to help if it meant staying out of trouble, but Ava could tell that things were changing. Let's say we're looking for this guy behind the wheel. Where would we find him? Ava asked, her voice steady. He hangs out at the old arcade down by the docks. You might catch him there, but be careful, he doesn't like the cops. Ava and her team looked at each other, determination and anxiety showing on their faces. This was a lead they couldn't afford to ignore. Thanks for the info, Ava said. The team quickly got back to their car. The mood had changed, the tension was gone, and there was a sense of purpose. Ava took the wheel and drove toward the docks, her mind racing. As they got closer to the old arcade, Ava couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The area was run down, with flickering lights and peeling paint. It had seen better days. The crumbling walls seemed to echo with laughter from the past. They parked a short distance away. Ava led the way as they walked toward the entrance. The arcade was dimly lit, and the sounds of video games clashed with the distant murmur of voices. It was a typical scene that felt both familiar and unsettling. Keep your eyes peeled, Ava whispered to her team as they walked in. We're looking for a guy who fits the description. The place was packed with teens and young adults playing video games, unaware of the drama going on around them. Ava scanned the room, her instincts sharp, and they made their way to the entrance. As they walked through the maze of machines, Jenkins suddenly pointed out a figure slouched in a booth at the far end. The man was wearing a hoodie and had his head down, concentrating on a handheld game. As they got closer, Ava's heart raced, the tension was palpable. Excuse me, she said, her voice firm but calm. We need to talk to you. The man looked up, surprise flashing across his face before a guarded expression took over as he tried to look unconcerned about what he asked. We're with the FBI, Jenkins said. Flashing his badge, he said, we have some questions about a robbery that you might know something about. The man's eyes widened, and he instinctively moved to stand up, but Ava was faster. She stepped forward and said, We're not here to hurt you. We just want information. Help us, and you might be able to help yourself. There was a tense silence as the man thought about what to do next. Finally, he dropped his gaze and said, I don't know anything. I'm just trying to keep my head down. Ava wasn't buying it. He looked uncomfortably around as if he were thinking about what might happen if he spoke. All right. I might have heard some names, but I don't want any trouble. Ava nodded, her heart racing with excitement. Just tell us what you know. The man hesitated, looking over his shoulder as if he was waiting for someone to show up. There's a crew that's been working around here. They've been hitting stores for a while, and I heard they were planning something big. Big Ramirez kept her voice steady. They have a guy who's supposed to be the driver. He's smooth and quick, but he's also dangerous. I wouldn't mess with him if I were you, she said. Where can we find him? Ava asked, her voice intense and urgent. I don't know, he keeps to himself, but I've heard he hangs out by the dock sometimes, especially late at night. Ava looked around at her team. The pieces were starting to fit together. They were getting closer to finding the truth. Time was running out, so Ava sincerely tried to calm him down by saying, "Thank you for the information. We will do our best to keep you safe." As they turned to leave, Ava felt a surge of determination. They were getting closer to solving the case, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Matthews was still working in the shadows, ready to stalk them.